7 lost cities that vanished without a trace. There is an entire Egyptian city lying at the bottom of the sea, with 18-foot statues still standing on its drowned streets. There is a city in the jungles of Cambodia that was once the largest on Earth, and then the forest simply ate it. And there is a city in Pakistan, 4,500 years old, so advanced it had indoor plumbing before Rome existed. And we still don't know its real name or what happened to the people who built it. Every one of these places is real, mapped and standing, or sunk, exactly where I'll tell you, and each one asks the same haunting question. How does an entire city full of thousands of people just vanish? Civilizations rise, shine for centuries, and then disappear so cleanly that when someone finally stumbles on the ruins, they can't believe people built them at all. Let's start underwater off the coast of Egypt. 1. Heracleion, the city that sank into the sea. For over 1,000 years, scholars thought Heracleion was a myth. It appeared in ancient Greek texts, a great Egyptian port where Helen of Troy supposedly once visited, the gateway through which all trade entered Egypt before Alexandria existed. But no one could find it, so historians filed it, like so many places, under legend. Then, in the year 2000, a French underwater archaeologist searching the seabed off the Egyptian coast found it, not on land, but 6 kilometers out, 10 meters beneath the Mediterranean. An entire city drowned. Colossal statues of pharaohs and gods, some over 16 feet tall, still standing on the seafloor. A great temple, gold coins and jewelry, the remains of dozens of ancient ships in what was once the busiest harbor in Egypt, a whole metropolis, perfectly preserved under the waves, exactly where the myths said it would be. So what sank it? The ground it was built on was soft Nile clay, and over centuries a combination of rising seas, earthquakes, and soil liquefaction, where waterlogged ground suddenly behaves like liquid, caused the whole city to slip beneath the water. The land it stood on essentially turned to soup and swallowed it. And here's what still stops archaeologists cold. After more than 20 years of diving, they estimate only about 5% of Heracleion has been excavated. 95% of an entire ancient city is still down there in the dark, waiting. If a city this size could be lost for over 1,000 years and only found by accident, how many more are still out there, undiscovered? Drop your guess in the comments and tell me what country you're watching from, because the next city wasn't swallowed by water. It was swallowed by something alive. 2. Angkor, the city. The jungle ate. In the 9th century, in what is now Cambodia, the Khmer Empire began building a capital that would become at its peak the largest city on the entire planet. This was Angkor. At its height, it sprawled across an area the size of modern Los Angeles, home to perhaps 750,000 people, centered on Angkor Wat, still the largest religious monument ever built by human hands. And these people were engineering geniuses. Angkor's true marvel wasn't the temples, it was water. The Khmer built an enormous, sophisticated network of canals, reservoirs, and channels to capture the monsoon and water their rice across the dry season. They essentially engineered an entire landscape, a machine of water that fed 1 million mouths. For 500 years, it worked. And then Angkor was abandoned, and the jungle swallowed it whole. Roots prying apart stone, trees growing straight through temple walls, the forest erasing the greatest city on earth until a French explorer rediscovered it in the 1860s and refused to believe locals when they said it had always been there. So what killed it? This is where it gets interesting, because the latest research points back to that brilliant water system. Evidence suggests a period of violent climate swings, brutal droughts followed by monsoons so intense they shattered the very water network the city depended on. The thing that made Angkor possible may be the thing that destroyed it. Their greatest strength became the crack that broke them, and laser scanning from above keeps revealing more. In recent years, they've found entire additional cities hidden under the Cambodian jungle that no one knew were there. 3. Petra, the city, carved into a cliff, then forgotten. Deep in the desert mountains of Jordan, at the end of a canyon so tight you can touch both walls at once, the rock suddenly opens, and a temple the size of a cathedral stares back, carved directly into a cliff of rose-red stone. This is Petra. It may look familiar from a movie screen, but the real story is stranger than any film. Petra was built over 2,000 years ago by the Nabateans, a people who started as desert nomads and became fabulously rich controlling the trade routes for frankincense, myrrh, and spices. With that wealth, they carved an entire city, hundreds of buildings, tombs, and temples. Not by stacking stone, but by cutting it away, sculpting whole facades straight out of the mountain. And here's their hidden genius. They built a city for tens of thousands of people in a desert that barely sees rain by engineering an invisible system of channels, dams, and cisterns that captured every drop of the rare flash floods and stored it. They conjured a thriving metropolis out of bare rock and almost no water. So, how do you lose a city carved into solid stone, slowly and quietly? The trade routes Petra lived on shifted. A series of earthquakes damaged the city and its water system. The Nabateans drifted away, the knowledge faded, and for over 1,000 years Petra was known only to local Bedouin, while the wider world completely forgot it existed until a Swiss explorer in disguise talked his way into the canyon in 1812. A whole city, hiding in plain sight in the rock, simply erased from the world's memory. 4. Mohenjo-daro, the metropolis with no name. Around 2600 BC, while the Egyptians were still building the pyramids, a city rose on the plains of what is now Pakistan that was, in some ways, more advanced than anything in the world at the time. We call it Mohenjo-daro, which means Mound of the Dead Men. But that's not its real name. We don't know its real name. The people who built it had a written script, and we still can't read it. An entire civilization's voice sitting right in front of us, and we can't hear a word of it. What we can see is staggering. A city of tens of thousands laid out on a precise grid of streets. City planning that wouldn't be matched for thousands of years. Multi-story brick houses, a great public bath, and a covered drainage and sewage system running under the streets with private bathrooms in the homes. The world's first urban sanitation, indoor plumbing 4,000 years before most of humanity would have it again. And here's the strangest part. No palaces, no giant temples to a king, no monuments to a ruler at all. The evidence points to a sophisticated, wealthy society that seems to have had no obvious kings, an ancient city of near equals. And then, around 1900 BC, it was abandoned and vanished from history for nearly 4,000 years. Why? Nobody knows for certain. The leading idea is environmental, that the rivers feeding the city shifted course or dried up, and without water, the metropolis simply couldn't go on. No invasion, no great battle in the evidence, just a brilliant, peaceful, advanced city that the textbooks didn't even know existed until the 1920s, built by people whose name, language, and fate are all still a blank. 5. Great Zimbabwe, the city that rewrote a continent. For centuries, when Europeans saw the colossal stone ruins in southern Africa, massive curving walls 36 feet high and 16 feet thick built from nearly 1 million precisely fitted granite blocks without a drop of mortar, they refused to believe Africans had built them. They invented theories crediting it to Phoenicians, to the lost cities of the Bible, to anyone but the local people. That refusal wasn't science. It was prejudice. And the truth, when it finally won, rewrote the story of an entire continent.
Great Zimbabwe was built between the 11th and 15th centuries by the ancestors of the local Shona people, a powerful African kingdom that grew rich on gold and cattle and trade, reaching all the way to the coast and beyond, where archaeologists found Chinese porcelain and Persian glass in the ruins. At its height, it held perhaps 18,000 people. The stonework is so sophisticated, so massive, that the modern country of Zimbabwe took its very name from these ruins. A nation named after the city colonizers said its people couldn't have built. So why was it abandoned by the 16th century?
The likely answer is the same quiet killer we keep meeting. The land gave out. Overuse, environmental strain, shifting trade, and political change drained the city's power, and its people moved on. Great Zimbabwe's mystery isn't really how was it built. We know African hands built it. The real lesson is darker and more human. How easily we erase the achievements of people we've decided in advance were lesser. The dirt proved them wrong. It usually does. 6. Teotihuacan, the city whose builders are a mystery. When the Aztecs wandered into the great ruined city in the Valley of Mexico, it was already ancient, already abandoned, already a mystery. They were so awed by its vast pyramids that they gave it the name we still use. Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. They assumed only gods could have built something so immense. But here's the haunting part. The Aztecs didn't build it, and they had no idea who did. The real builders were already long gone, their identity lost. At its peak, around 1,800 years ago, Teotihuacan was one of the largest cities on Earth. Over 100,000 people on a precise grid around the colossal Pyramid of the Sun, a cosmopolitan metropolis with neighborhoods for people from across Mesoamerica. And yet, the deepest facts are blank. We don't know what language they spoke, what they called themselves, or who ruled them. Magnificent art and architecture, and almost no readable record of who they were. And then, sometime around 550 AD, the city collapsed. Excavations show evidence that the great buildings along the main avenue were deliberately burned, possibly an invasion, possibly an internal uprising against the ruling elite, possibly a society tearing itself apart after drought and famine broke people's faith in their leaders. A city of 100,000 gone, its name, its people, and the reason for its fall all swallowed by time, leaving only pyramids so grand that a later civilization assumed gods had made them. 7. Caral, the city that was older than anyone believed. We end in the desert of Peru, with a city that rewrote the timeline of an entire hemisphere. For a long time, the story was settled. Complex civilization in the Americas came relatively late. Then archaeologists took a hard look at some large mounds in the Supa Valley that everyone had assumed were just natural hills, and discovered they were pyramids. Enormous ones. And when they dated the city around them, the result was so old that they checked it again and again, because it broke the rules. This is Caral. It is around 5,000 years old, meaning it was flourishing at the same time as ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, making it one of the oldest cities in the entire Americas, thousands of years earlier than anyone thought urban civilization existed there. 6 large pyramids, sunken circular plazas, residential complexes, a city built by a sophisticated society in the desert. And here's the detail that stuns people. Across the whole site, archaeologists have found no defensive walls, no weapons, no signs of warfare. Caral appears to have been a thriving, complex society that flourished for centuries, peacefully. They even found knotted string records hinting at an accounting system thousands of years before the Inca used the same idea. And then, like all the others, after roughly 500 years, Caral was abandoned, likely as the climate turned against it, unrecognized in the desert until the late 1990s. A city as old as the pyramids, hiding in plain sight in Peru, that pushed the story of civilization in the Americas back by thousands of years. Look at what these 7 cities have in common. A drowned Egyptian port, a jungle capital the size of a city, a metropolis carved into a cliff, a nameless civilization with indoor plumbing, an African kingdom colonizers refused to credit, a city so grand the Aztecs thought gods built it, and a desert city older than anyone dared believe. Different continents, different millennia, and every single one rose to greatness and then vanished so completely that the world forgot it had ever lived. And notice the killer that keeps coming back. Not war, most of the time, not conquest. The thing that ended most of these cities was the slow turn of the environment. A river that moved, a sea that rose, a climate that swung, land that simply gave out. These were not primitive people who failed because they were simple. They were brilliant engineers, masters of water, stone, and city building. And the earth outlasted them anyway. That should land a little close to home, because if cities this advanced could be erased and forgotten, the comfortable idea that our own cities are permanent starts to look very thin. So here's the thought I can't shake. Heracleion was lost for over 1,000 years and found by accident. Caral hid in plain sight as natural hills. We're told only about 5% of Heracleion has even been excavated. So, how many more lost cities are still out there, under the sand, under the jungle, under the sea, that we haven't found yet? How much of the human story is still missing? The map is not finished. We're still drawing it. Which of these 7 would you most want to walk through, if you could? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. The next lost city is always one discovery away. See you next time.